Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mark Tech going live. I'm once again checking if all my tech is correct. My iPad is usually 15 seconds behind as the live stream starts, so I can respond to chats if any come in. But I'm doing the stream at a very inopportune time, so I don't expect anybody to really join. And something different because the video is something very different. I usually make Apple related videos and technology focused videos like with my Samsung videos. This is pretty new for me. Well, as somebody can guess, basically, I am pretty nerdy. I like video games, and from my childhood on, I've been a big fan of Nintendo games. Nowadays, I'm more of a Sony pony, some might say, but primarily because I like more adult-oriented games. And no, not that kind of adult-oriented games. And we just had the latest Nintendo Direct, which I usually watch live, didn't have time for that, so I caught up on it later, and that's how I caught up on the controversy about it, which was supposedly building up a little before the stream, and then supposedly afterwards it still wasn't quite clear, but now we know. And the fact is, if I can find my cursor, is that Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, for those of you who don't know, the successor basically to Breath of the Wild, a wildly successful game, will be officially $70. Now, why is that significant? Well, Nintendo games for the Nintendo Switch have been thus far $60 for full price titles, while Sony has obviously moved towards $70 games on the PS5. And as you can see here, Xbox held on to the $60 price point a little longer. Now announced in December that their upcoming first-party titles like Starfield, Forza Motorsport, and Redfall, even though those games will likely come out in the reverse order, Redfall, Motorsport, and Starfield, if rumors are to be believed, that those games will in fact be also $70. Microsoft's argument is sort of that these games are all next-gen exclusive, while Sony was criticized for charging $70 for PS5 titles and $60 for PS4 titles, with a $10 upcharged, where you can, for example, get a $60 version of, let's say, God of War Ragnarok, but then you would need to pay the extra $10 to pay the best possible version on the PS5. And prior to that, we have seen also some controversy with titles like Horizon Forbidden West, promising free upgrades, then not getting them, and then getting them because of consumer backlash. So it's been a little bit of a mess with $70 pricing. My attitude to that is, as long as I can see a major jump in graphical fidelity or performance and next-gen features like much faster load times, maybe something like what we saw with Ratchet and Clank, like instant world generation, basically, thanks to super fast SSD, then I don't mind, and I'm kind of getting excited, as you can hear, like in a somewhat negative way, because I usually don't like making negative content. If I wanted to make my first gaming video more negative, I kind of would be talking more about Xbox, but I just refuse to talk about what I don't like. Instead, I just focus on what I like, and then I can mention whatever I don't like in comparison to that. That's kind of how my Samsung videos, why they work, in my opinion, is because I don't actively dislike Samsung. In fact, I like a lot of what they're doing, and then I get a little disappointed when we're getting right to the edge of what I want them to deliver, and they fail, in my opinion, at least for what I want. So, and this is a little bit controversial for me, because I was somebody who supported and still does the $70 price point for games, be it from for PS5, be it for Xbox Series X, not for Series S. I hate the Series S, but that's another discussion altogether. I supported $70 games for PC, which ironically the PC market has been so against it that some games are now way cheaper on Steam than they are on the PS5 and Xbox storefront, at least here in Germany, but that's an entire different discussion. In fact, I'm trying to avoid the discussion here, but I kind of have to get into it. So, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, the sequel to Breath of the Wild, will be $70 instead of $60. Now, why does that matter? Well, because it's still a Nintendo Switch game, and the Nintendo Switch came out in 2017. It has the Tegra X1 processor, and all subsequent versions of it, right, be it with a more efficient 60nm Tegra X1, or be it the Nintendo Switch Lite, the Nintendo Switch OLED, they all are powered by the same chip, which means the graphical fidelity on all of them will be equal. And the only difference is if you are targeting the internal monitor, the internal screen, or if you're projecting to a TV. That's all. Tears of the Kingdom will look better than Breath of the Wild. Whether or not it will run better is actually a different discussion, because some of the graphics that we see in the trailer kind of make me question whether or not we will see adequate frame rate or load management. But yeah, so let's just quickly, I'm not watching the full trailer to avoid copyright strikes, but let's just quickly move through it. Right, okay, rain, a lot of color banding, typical for, but like pretty good, like lightning effects and stuff. I'm doing it without the audio again to avoid copyright issues. It's a beautiful trailer. Nintendo knows how to do that stuff. So yeah, like, it's a cel-shaded game, but it definitely looks better than Breath of the Wild did. So a lot of enemies, sorry. It's late at night, that's why I'm a little less concentrated than usually. So this is how Link now looks. It's basically the same. He now has a cool car. The traversal system is going to be interesting because you are now traversing through the skies, or much faster with like landmowers basically. And in my opinion, that's kind of interesting, because then level of detail management as you traverse so quickly through the environments will become more difficult. So, and I mean, they call it an official gameplay trailer, so I assume it's all rendered on the Switch, right? It never says here that it's not. It's trying to get back. Nintendo Switch. Correct me if I'm wrong here, and if it's running, like, it's not an offline render. It would look way better if it was an offline render. That's at least my theory. And as anybody who like listens to Digital Foundry, maybe this trailer is too big for Switch, right? Maybe it kind of hints again at the Switch 2 or Switch Pro, but I'm just inclined to believe that this is like a slightly cleaned up version of what you get on the Switch. Basically maybe like anti-aliased a little better, captured in the highest quality. It looks a little better than what I expect a Switch game to look, but it's also a much newer title than Breath of the Wild was, which started its life as a Wii U title. So, but let's move to the controversy. There isn't much that I'm taking away from any article. This is basically just an opinion piece from me. IGN here, but multiple other sources have confirmed that the Switch is moving to $70, at least for Tears of the Kingdom. Now, none of the other games that we have seen announced today are $70, But then again, except for Pikmin 4, we kind of didn't get much AAA Nintendo goodness. We got like Metroid Prime Remaster, which is a $40 game, so it's a little bit different. We will have to see like what future Mario games will cost. Maybe even like if a Pokemon game could go up to $70, though I hope not, while retaining some of the technical difficulties that we have seen in Scarlet and Violet. So yeah, so that's basically it, right? So this is like Twitter reactions from it. A lot of like somewhat popular YouTuber, like gaming YouTubers, kind of refused to really comment on this. They were like, "Oh, I'm waiting for more official confirmations and stuff." That was a little surprising to me, because that certainly wasn't the case when Sony was announcing their $60 to $70 transition. So they're definitely a little more careful when it comes to their Nintendo coverage. So basically, this is why I also showed like this article about the $70 price tag now from Xbox games, and that is because people are now trying to basically blame Sony. And my counter argument here, and something that also goes in favor of the Xbox price increase, is that the Switch hasn't changed. Like, what we see here, like, okay, it's a good looking trailer for a Switch game, right? But it's still a Switch game. We are talking about a system that launched in 2017 with not the greatest hardware at that point, a semi-mobile, semi-home console. The Wii U had $60 games, right? So technically the Switch didn't increase game prices, but one of its predecessors, because it definitely isn't just a Nintendo Wii U sequel, was the 3DS. And the 3DS had $30, $40, sometimes $50 full-priced games. Like $60, So the Switch, at best, retained the price of its previous system, and at worst, increased it, and let's meet in the middle, it kind of struck a nice balance. So now we are basically 6 years later. This game is coming out in May. This Switch will be hitting 6 years of age in April, if I'm not wrong. And now we are seeing a price increase for a system that we don't even know what the successor is gonna look like. You can shit all on Sony all you want, but at least we knew what the PS5 is going to be, and we knew what were going to be the typical enhancements that we would be getting in next-gen games, right? At the very least, we are getting like a resolution bump and a performance increase. Most games obviously had also better texture details, better shadow settings. Some offered ray tracing, other offers like completely new, like basically paradigms, like we saw with Ratchet and Clank. Some were a little more underwhelming, like the upgrade for Ghost of Tsushima. Others were very, very impressive, like Horizon Forbidden West being wildly different between its PS4 to its PS5 version, up to the point that the Burning Shores DLC, if I remember it correctly, it being called that, will be PS5 exclusive, because the developer said that with our development pipeline, basically, we built a PS4 version, we upgraded it massively to PS5, and now we're continuing with PS5. So that $10 price increase, even though like Horizon Forbidden West technically wasn't supposed to charge $10 more, but let's say just in general, like God of War Ragnarok, Gran Turismo 7, there's a lot that is coming from those $10. And just in general, given that those games were more expensive to begin with because they were targeting the PS4, and the Switch is closer to a PS3 than it is a PS4. It might have more advanced graphical features than the PS3, but in terms of raw compute power, it is closer to it. This is mind-boggling to me because I'm not a hater. I am absolutely fine with companies charging whatever they want, and then I vote with my wallet. But the reason why I'm really surprised by this is because Nintendo was usually very smart when it comes to straddling the line of being a kids and an adult-oriented company. And being part of being a kids-oriented company was pricing their games somewhat aggressively. And that was, when we go back to the 3DS, $30, $40 games, a lot of it for the 3DS, maybe a few $50 titles right here and there. And then $60 with inflation, like the transition to HD, that all made perfect sense. But where is the new transition that justifies even higher price tags? Some might say, well, Tears of the Kingdom has been long delayed. It's an expensive game because of it. Guess what is also long delayed? Something like Gran Turismo 7 is a game long in development, and it will actually keep getting updates. Like Starfield, yes, it's a $70 game, of course, but it's also a long delay, or at least a long awaited game, but even though it also has been delayed. But part of it is those games target 4K, higher resolutions, even larger worlds, and I can appreciate what Tears of the Kingdom brings to the table. I'm not calling it a kid's game. I'm not calling it a poorly made game. I'm certainly not calling it a cheap game. But the Nintendo Switch just hit 122 million units of install base. Now, a lot of those units are in the same households. So I usually wouldn't compare like the Switch to something like the PS4. But the PS4 is at 117. So even when you add like some of the intersection with the PS5, which has now 32 million units sold, the Switch install base is still huge. And the potential to sell people on those games is enormous. So $60 right now for a system that is wildly successful should be more than enough to recoup all development costs and make a healthy profit on top. Like, the Breath of the Wild on the Switch sold like 25 plus million units, probably like close to 30 by now. Like, this is insane to be saying, oh yeah, the sequel to that game on the same system with the same hardware, right? It's like, we can argue like the PS4 Pro, for example, technically still being a PS4, or the Xbox One X still technically being an Xbox One. But you were getting more for it while the games were costing the same. And now you're on the Switch 6 years in, you're getting more expensive games without getting more out of it. Now, yes, you could argue the system is more optimized, like the games are now more optimized for the Switch system. But then I also want to present a game like The Last of Us Part 2 to you, which was what is probably the best optimized game for PS4, and it was $60. So and it came out actually even later in the PS4 life cycle than Tears of the Kingdom is coming out in the life cycle of the Switch. This is insanity, guys, and this is where, like, I understand that commodity consumption is like the one thing where everybody believes to be an activist, right? Like, you can try to block like Hogwarts Legacy, or you can try not to boycott Hogwarts Legacy. You can pay $70 for games or not, or you can try to avoid paying for games in general by subscribing to something like PS Plus Extra or Game Pass. But in my opinion, at least all of those business models, like all of those suggested prices, kind of come with their own like understanding, right? Or at least you get like more expensive games, but on a much better hardware system, right? Now you're paying more for a subscription service, but that subscription service now has a lot more in it, or it now has the newer games, or it has like free upgrades to games on the newer system. Like, what are we getting with Tears of the Kingdom? Like, as yes, it's in of itself, it will be a good game, and Nintendo might try justifying it this way, right? Oh, Tears of the Kingdom is just a great game and cost us a lot to make, so please pay us $70. But that's not how the gaming market works. Like, it's not like you're buying some antique where you're like debating, oh, this is like better and rarer than the other one. AAA games cost the same. Sometimes, yes, for example, here in Germany, Breath of the Wild has always been basically more expensive than all other AAA games, if you want to call it them, on the Switch. So this is now this, but officially worldwide and at an even higher price tag. So, like, this is insane to me because, look, Nintendo games are great. They're innovative. They are built very well for the system they're running on, but they're not worth $70 to me for one reason. And this is the Switch is barely better than the Wii U. Like, maybe you can count it being like 2x better. Who knows, right? Depends on the specific game and like the visual features it's targeting. But in my opinion, like, okay, so now we're going even further back. So now we are hitting like before PS4, before Xbox One, where that level of graphical fidelity and performance that the Switch reaches was absolutely attainable. And then you have like individual titles that sometimes basically aren't better than like the original Xbox 360 versions. Like, sure, I'm not saying that this will apply to Tears of the Kingdom. I'm again not hating on the game. I'm a big Nintendo fan of the games they put out. I've gifted Nintendo Switches to my nieces. I've had a Nintendo Switch until recently, until I gave it away. Like, I bought games like Breath of the Wild, Super Mario Odyssey. I am a sort of proud owner of all Pokemon games. But this to me is a ripoff. Right, I cannot say it any nicer than that, because what Sony did, in my opinion, and I will defend it until my dying breath, basically, they said new system, new price point, and it's not like every new system comes with a price increase, but because the PS5 basically coincided with like now 15 years of inflation since the $60 price tag was introduced, because AAA development is now not just more expensive basically per developer because projects last that long, but if you look at how many people are actually needed to develop a game like God of War Ragnarok or Horizon Forbidden West, we also need much larger teams than ever. And in a more competitive market than ever, we also now need larger marketing campaigns. So there are objective costs associated. And if you actually look at, for example, at Sony's operating margins, they have actually gone down. Their overall revenue has increased and their profits have slightly gone up, but nowhere near as much as their revenue has gone up, for the simple reason because actual cost to maintain everything from the servers for their PSN services to, of course, the development costs associated with their in-house studios has objectively gone up and gone up a lot. A lot of games, right, like let's say the next successor to God of War, or the next Horizon game, or the next Spider-Man game after Spider-Man 2, all those games that will now be targeting like only PS5, maybe even like a little bit of PS6, all those games that will try to push graphical fidelity to an even higher level to optimize even further, these games will like start hitting like $200 million price points. Like, that has to be considered. And it's not just like, oh, $200 million, so you sell like $60 games and you sell like 4 million and then you're, that's not how it works. You have to also account for marketing costs. You also have to account if you're printing disc with some of that shipping and stuff like that. With Nintendo, at least, cartridges, right? Cartridges are a good excuse for at least some price volatility. So I will not argue on that. But then again, then I would argue that then they should offer the digital version for the same $60 and then the physical version at $70. I know there are some legal issues based on that, but there needs to be some remedy here. We cannot be asking $70 for a game for a system that is 6 years old, and we don't even know if the successor will be fully backwards compatible, if it will offer any kind of enhancements, if that will apply to the digital version and the physical version. Because that is also part of the appeal, by the way. Like with Switch games, you don't install them because cartridges are fast enough. On the PS5, no disk can keep up with the internal SSD, so this is why you install games from the disk. But that works for updated games, right? If you're moving from a PS4 version to a PS5 version, because the game file basically changes anyway, right? It doesn't matter what version you have on the disk. The disk is basically just an authentication system. But what now happens with the cartridge, right? You're putting in a cartridge into a Switch Pro or a Switch 2, and that cartridge now has the old version. What happens then? Right? What is happening then? I know I'm rambling here, but like, do you now have to download and install a new version, but then the cartridge is like the authentication system for it? Because Switches don't come with a lot of internal storage, and the SD card can actually be substantially slower than the internal storage, which might end up holding back games and performance, especially on a newer system. That is insane, guys. It's not that the game will be bad. It's not that I think that asking like $70 for a good game is bad. It's that Nintendo has such an easy path towards $70 games, and that path has always been a new system. But because they've gotten so accustomed to offering Switch like level performance, like, look at this. This is, by the way, HD, so this is not like, I understand it will be compressed through the stream and everything else like it, but like, this is not a game that would be even $50 on a PS5 nowadays or Xbox Series X. Like, yes, of course, with like, you could up the resolution here. Like, I'm probably will if I emulate that game at some point. But like, this isn't a $70 game in 2023, and it certainly won't be worth it in 2024, 2025. Because Nintendo is also known to keep prices artificially high. They don't produce a lot of physical goods. They don't offer a lot of discounts. So, like, yeah, this looks pretty, but also look at the LOD management, right? Like, this looks like nothing basically in the background. If this was a PS5 or Xbox Series X game, by the way, I'm also pretty sure that this is the best case scenario. Like, if you will be actually running it on the Switch, there's a good possibility that a lot of it will be like lower resolution depending on the angle you're viewing it. But like, that's simply not worth $70. And yes, a lot of people will buy it at $70, which kind of like kills my entire argument, right? Because, oh, I just said it's not worth it, but to many people it is. I've had the discussion when it came to the PS5 charging $70 for several games. I've had a discussion with people who disagree that, for example, Ghost of Tsushima should have a $10 upgrade path. And that I kind of actually came around on that, because I thought that the improvements to Ghost of Tsushima would be bigger. But I was at least a little more forgiving to the developer who had like offered like the Legends multiplayer mode. So there were some redeeming factors that came into play for Ghost of Tsushima. Also, Ghost of Tsushima is my second favorite game of the previous generation. So I forgive that game a lot. But like this... Like, I don't care how much you like the game. I don't care how much you like Nintendo. The argument isn't that the game is bad. The argument is that the pricing is bad. That the argument for any price increase basically doesn't exist, except for, oh, game was expensive to make. Well, guess what? Elden Ring was likely way more expensive than this to make, because it took a similar amount of time. And at least it was targeting somewhat decent fidelity levels. This does not by 2023. Yes, we can argue it might look amazing for a Switch game, but it certainly doesn't in the overall grand scheme of things. Like, a lot of people are sometimes like making fun of like PS5 and Xbox Series X because of like the existence of like 3090s or 4090s. And then there's also like the Xbox Series S that I like to make fun of. But this is just like okay, this looks good, but then again, it's also like cell shaded. It looks more simplistic. This basically looks like a somewhat more detailed version than Breath of the Wild. But look, you have like a little bit of grass here, right? And if that grass would extend to here, we would have like a more like luscious world, you could say, but it doesn't, because the LOD management with the Switch's like what is it, like 2.5 gigabytes of RAM that it has like available? I'm not even sure anymore. Like, it cannot simply handle that. Like, you cannot tell me that like this is, I assume that those are normal map reflections, right? Certainly nothing in screen space, because I guess you could argue that this is mud and not water, but still there would be more reflection than just a simple shadow, right? So it's not like the game has gone like completely apeshit like with Nintendo developers. It will be a prettier game, sure, than Breath of the Wild was, but that is expected after 6 years. Also after all the delays, and now certainly with the $70 price tag. But in my opinion, like, come on, like, let's go a little further, right? Yeah, like, look at this. Like, okay, so you can sort of make out what this is. But, like, the grass also starts, like, disappearing in here. Okay, so the release date. It all looks pretty, right? The art style is great. I understand the developers are super talented. But come on, guys, like a lot of people were like criticizing that like GT7 didn't have like real-time reflections, and but you are upcharging like $10 more. Well, guess what, MFers? GT7 now will have a free upgrade for a PSVR 2 version for the full game, and that is a lot of work. So if you are gonna tell me that this justifies the same pricing as that did, I will kill you. I'm sorry. Like, even like God of War Ragnarok, which didn't see that many improvements, and I'm sorry to constantly bringing up Sony games, because a lot, like, I don't want to bring up Activision here, like, who increased prices, but then I would also argue that like COD, the latest COD games on PS5 and Xbox Series X easily justify paying $10 more than on the on PS4 and Xbox One. Like, it's all pretty, but it's all not, like, at what point, like, we are now calling, like, PS5 and Xbox Series X current gen, right? Those are not next gen systems anymore. They're 2 years old. Now they're easily available. I just went on Amazon. You can now get the PS5 in 2.5 weeks, both digital and physical disc edition. So that wasn't the problem. What generation now is the Switch? Because the Switch definitely underperforms the PS4 and the Xbox One, which means it's leaps and bounds behind the PS5 and the Xbox Series X. How can you justify charging $70 games for that system? Now, that was a lot of energy, and I hope you guys will let me know in the comments how wrong or how right I am. This was a spontaneous video. I actually planned a video on talking about the iPhone 16 Ultra, or the fact that I actually ordered a Galaxy S23 Ultra, so I had a lot of ultra discussions planned, but I've been a little bit on Twitter, and I know Twitter isn't a real place. It doesn't represent the real world. But I saw people defend this because they were like, oh, Sony started this. Oh, Microsoft followed anyway. Like, yes, in a completely different context. Like, Nintendo is doing this for one reason, and that reason is look at their last quarterly report, which underperformed expectations because they didn't sell as many Switches as they thought. Overall, software sales are good, but they are a little subpar. It clearly shows that they don't have a lot of like AAA games on their system in comparison to the other consoles and Steam, because obviously something like the latest Call of Duty doesn't run on the Switch. Okay, so their remedy is partially make more games, make more good games. Very good. I'm very pro that. Like, I loved a lot of the announcements. Even the NSO announcements, which were like, oh, duh, of course they have Game Boy and Game Boy Advance emulators finally on the Switch. I'm happy with that. Better late than never. I'm not a consumer who will always complain about stuff that is coming a little late. I can deal with that. But what I cannot deal with is disingenuous arguments, especially from fanboys, about marketing decisions that clearly are just designed to stuff their pockets a little more. And yes, all companies want to make money. This is my last point. A lot of people were telling me, oh, Sony's price increases, be it hardware or software, are just greed. And yes, that is partially true because all companies have to make money. That is their legal obligation to their shareholders, by the way. Oh my God, I just ate that word. It's their legal obligation to their shareholders. But then you also have to consider, like, Sony's margins haven't increased. Like, they just had an amazing quarter, but that was because a lot of like pent up demand for the PS5 pushed a lot of purchasing towards that quarter, right? So this would have been basically sales that would have been evenly distributed throughout like the last year, but because the previous 2 quarters were basically dog shit with 3 million PS5s every quarter, of course that quarter where they were able to sell 7 million PS5s and 11 million God of War copies, like with 70% of them or 60% of them, I believe, on PS5, 40% on PS4, right? So it's on average like $67, one could say. Like, that is insane because of course that stuff will be more expensive. Inflation is real. Like higher higher wages for developers are real. The potential for unionization among developers and game testers is real. Like, and the games are bigger, more beautiful, they run better. And this is not that. This is a game that is better optimized for the Switch. Okay, that's expected. That's why people buy consoles. If those games wouldn't get better optimized over time, then everybody would be buying PCs. This is not an argument to be charging $10 more. And the argument for a new system to charge $10 more, especially now that we had a lot of inflation, especially for games that are targeting very high levels of graphical fidelity, that I understand. Doing that for Tears of the Kingdom, I do not. And even if I had a Switch, I wouldn't be buying that game now. I will be waiting for a Switch 2 to see what it offers, though I'm kind of afraid that they will cheap out a little bit on it, right? Like use like 8nm Samsung fabrication, use like at that point like 2-gen old like Nvidia hardware. It will definitely be better than the first Switch, but it might come in below the performance of a Steam Deck, which would be very, very disappointing. Like if it comes out so much later than a Steam Deck. And like, I hate being so negative. I want to love the game. I want to love what Nintendo is doing. But at this point, I'm sick and tired of the Switch, the hardware side, the prices that Nintendo is like asking, like the $350 for a Switch OLED is ridiculous. The $300 for a base Switch is like even worse in my opinion. At least an OLED screen kind of justifies you doing more with it. Like a lot of the initial promises for the Switch clearly didn't come to fruition, partially because of hardware reasons. Like a lot of third-party AAA support never materialized. Like a lot of the announcements that they shared, a lot of exciting smaller games, sure, but also definitely not AAA games for a reason, because if they had AAA reason, this is not an, I don't know what they called Nintendo Indies, like Nindies or something like that. Like, this was not a direct for Nintendo indie games. This was just a Nintendo Direct games. And once again, all the big games were Nintendo games. So, like, and even stuff like streaming on it, like if you want to like watch Netflix and stuff like that, never really came to fruition for most streaming services. I'm not blaming even the hardware for it, but then again, the Wi-Fi is crap as fuck. I'm sorry. The Wi-Fi is really bad, so I wouldn't also recommend stuff on it, and the screen on the base Switch is terrible. But now I'm really getting into the rambling zone. I planned on this being a 20-minute video. Now we hit the 40-minute mark. So I'm MarkTech. I'm really ranty. And I'm actually, I don't tell you to boycott the game, but I actually tell you to think about it, right? Is this the game that you want to support at $70? Is this what you want to see from Nintendo before we even get a new system? Ask yourself, if you were somebody who complained about it for Sony or Xbox, is it any way better here, right? Or is it actually that much worse? And to me, that was my conclusion, and that was kind of why I got angry that not enough coverage has been like done for that. Like, I know it's been like very recent news. It's like 2 hours old basically, or maybe just 1 hour depending on like where you live. That didn't make sense. That's not how time zones work. You see, I'm tired. It's 4 a.m. But I really wanted to make this video because I've been so grateful for the support. We've had like a video that just hit 700 views. We had a video that hit over 400 views. I hope to make more videos focused on Apple, Samsung, all kinds of tech. But as I promised, I will also be talking now more about games, consoles, game systems, something like the Steam Deck. And I will be talking more about my personal experience with everything from like games I like to systems I like or don't like. And this is the kind of stuff that ruins my mood a little bit, because it's not that the $10 will make a meaningful difference to me. I mean, I just ordered the Galaxy S23 Ultra on a whim, basically. So this is not the argument. The argument is that really comes together, right? All those $10 increases, even something like the Nintendo Switch OLED being more than the base version, even though it has like years of price reductions built in. Like, it's not that all of this is like a bad deal, but it's not even a good deal for decent hardware. At this point, it's somewhat okay deals for terrible old hardware. And as somebody who's a hardware enthusiast, like I do like games, I do like software, I understand that hardware without software is nothing. But good software deserves good hardware, and that has always been Apple's and Steve Jobs' mantra, and I always loved it. And good hardware deserves good software. And in this case, we have both the Switch is holding back Tears of the Kingdom, but also a game like Tears of the Kingdom, because it basically fuels the support of the Switch, right? It will result in the system staying longer on the market because people will be running out to buy like custom switches for Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, it does a disservice to the overall concept of the Switch, which in my opinion should have gotten like updates every like 3 to 4 years, sort of like a tablet. But then you have like games that still target the original Switch, but you have like pro versions, and you have like next gen versions depending on how quickly the hardware is actually turned around. And none of that will be happening basically until next year, maybe until like holiday 2024, when the system will be 7.5 years old, which means that the chip inside will be like 9 years old. And then it will likely even keep getting like 2 or 3 years of support afterwards, because the install base will be so huge. And then some third-party devs will be motivated to support it even beyond that. And that to me is discouraging, because none of that had to happen. We could have gotten Tears of the Kingdom for $60 on the Switch. We could have actually gotten like a Switch 2 with very good hardware this April that launches simultaneously with Tears of the Kingdom, and then Tears of the Kingdom with a better version costs $70 there. And it would have been completely clean. Consumers could make an informed decision, and the justification for a higher price tag would be there. And in fact, the average price tag would likely be higher anyway, because people will rush to buy it on the next system and not as much on the old one. This is what Sony did. To a degree, this is now what Microsoft is doing, and this is what I believe is the right thing to do. And Nintendo has failed to do this. They have failed to justify the $70 price tag for this game. If they had charged $70 for other games in the future, be it Mario and stuff like that, for still the same Switch hardware, it will also be unjustified. So I'm just telling people, if you care about this as much as I do, or even half as much, don't support those kind of practices. Like I told people from the beginning, if you don't like what Sony did, don't support it, right? I might support it and I might disagree with you, but I will not judge you for trying to boycott something or to vote with your wallet, because I actually believe that something can be achieved by consumers. It usually doesn't happen because we have a lot of like fake toxic positivity from like YouTubers who are like, oh, you're trying to boycott something. Oh, that would kill my Twitch streams. Like, for discussion, maybe I will comment on that at some point. We're now 45 minutes in, and this is now me officially tuning out. This was MarkTech. This was a way longer video, way more passionate than I expected it to be, but I think it's kind of important, and I hope you agree. Please let me know in the comments what you think, or on Twitter or anywhere else where you can find me. Tell me if I'm absolutely insane, because to a degree I even think that I am. And this was MarkTech saying thank you so much for all the continued support over the last couple of weeks, and I hope the support will continue as I keep making more content. Let me know what you would like to see next,